Soil evidence. This is a pretty short section here. This is just a few slides. Soil is, in a forensic standpoint, is any disintegrated material in the ground. We think of soil, we think of like dirt that plants grow in. It can also include rocks. It can include grass fragments on the ground. It includes vegetation, pollen, brick fragments, gravel, grit, pollution residue, embers, paint chips. Any kind of mixture that you find on the ground counts as soil in a forensics context. Soil is a very highly transferable type of medium. If you step on it, it's going to stick to the bottom of your shoe. If you fall on it, it's going to embed into your clothes. And unless you really take pains to wash it very, very thoroughly, you're probably going to have some of it left over after the fact. It's highly adherent to many materials, and depending on what it is we're talking about, it might be highly specific to a location. Some parts of the country, for example, have abundant clay soils. Other places have sandier soils. If you find a piece of evidence in a place with sandier soils that's heavily impregnated with clay, that might tell you that there's going to be other evidence in a different geographical location. You're always going to characterize soil evidence dry. So even if you collect it while it's wet, you'll need to let it dry completely before you do any characterizing of it. Not only are you not going to be able to see the real color of it because it's going to be wet and so it's going to look a little darker, you're not going to be able to sift out any kind of particulate mixed within it. You'll characterize soil based on its color, based on its texture, based on the presence or absence of plant or animal materials, based on the quantity of rocks and the type of rocks that are part of it. You might need to consult a geologist to characterize whatever mixture of rock fragments are in the soil. You'll look for how homogeneous that soil is and what the particle size of the soil overall is. Is it a mixture of a lot of things, or is it mostly the same thing? Unfortunately, there's not really any valid studies for overall reliability. There are some rare things that can be tied to very specific places in the world, but overall, because this is so transferable and it's such a broad category, it's really hard to pin down. So you're going to need to take the individual constituents of soil and try to characterize them independently within their own separate subspecialty. You might take a soil sample and try to characterize it with I don't know what a soil guy is, but a soil scientist. You might take a rock sample and run it past a geologist for characterization. You'll collect soil evidence at the appropriate depth. You don't want to get too much and you don't want to get too little. If you get too much, not only are you going to potentially obscure what you really need, but you're going to have so much to sift through that you're going to end up with potentially a lot of red herrings or superfluous data. You'll usually only have to take a surface amount of soil, almost never more than 1 or 2 inches deep. You usually only need a tablespoon or 2. The only real exception to that is if something is very deeply buried, you're going to want to get a sample of the surface level and at whatever depth that was buried at. Potentially some other depths along the way, depending on what the context around the situation dictates. You're going to also need to get a standard reference sample as always, and that should be collected within 100 yards radius at absolute most. The closer without disrupting any of your evidence, the better. If it's adhered to other evidence, you do not remove it. Just like other kinds of cross-transfer of evidence, you're going to package up that larger piece of evidence with its soil contamination all as one thing, and then document on the paperwork and on the container that it has the thing with soil adhered to it for analysis. So if this forensic scientist finds a bone, it's going to have a bunch of dirt on it from where it's buried. They're going to package up that dirty bone, completely dirty, in the bag. They're not going to want to sweep anything off. If there's any kind of lumps in your soil sample, you don't want to break those up, of course. Because there is potentially biomatter, and because the soil may have moisture that can cause bleeding into whatever you're packaging, you're going to want to put this in a breathable container. A paper bag is preferred.